Hi, my name is Kirk, your host of the Staying Healthy Today show. This is a show where we bring you key experts in the fields of nutrition, prevention, integrative, and lifestyle medicine. Most of the time, I interview someone, and sometimes I will review the topics that I have in this week's Substack, and that's what I'm going to do today. And it is April 3rd. Wishing you all, those who are from the Christian tradition, a Good Friday. And what I want to talk about, start off with, is actually part of a spiritual tradition. I go to a Shenyang show every. It will have big billboards. You'll see a dancer, and it'll say 5,000 years of Chinese culture before communism. The theme of this group, it's an American-based company, though it's mostly Asian individuals, and many are Falun Gong practitioners. And why do I bring that up? Well, the Falun Gong are a, a group in China that started in the late 1980s, and they grew to 100 million people. It is a Buddhist tradition, and it has some qigong in it. Many times you'll see um, hundreds, if not thousands, of people meditating in a big square. And it was a health-oriented thing that was encouraged actually by the Chinese Communist Party in the early years. And then it grew to some people say 75 million, 100 million people, but it got bigger than the Chinese Communist Party. And so in the late 1980s, the Communist Party said, we can't have that. It's threatening. And so they started to persecute the Falun Gong practitioners. And the Falun Gong practitioners are some of the most peaceful, Gandhi-like people that I know. And they're I have a little thing there, but their theme is I always get a T-shirt every year. It's truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. And anyway, I go to this show every year. It comes to Sacramento, California, and you see the beautiful dancers and their incredible athletic ability and dance and culture before the Chinese Communist Party 5,000 years. But uh, the medical aspect that if you've followed me, I've actually interviewed people, is that the Chinese Communist Party has a huge organ transplant business, and it's international. And it's almost on demand. In other words, sometimes you have to wait 6 months, year to get an organ in let's say the United States. In China, you can actually get within a couple of weeks. And that originally was said to be, well, they're prisoners and then they're available. But it turns out that they are trying to kind of have a twofold thing with the Falun Gong practitioners. One is they're trying to get rid of them, so that's one way to do it. And two, it kill them literally for their organs, and they do it in a horrific way, live organ harvesting. And I've interviewed Dr. Neil Dunn, a congressman from Florida, who is very outspoken about it, and then a psychologist, a doctor of psychology, Jessica Russo from Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. It sounds horrific. It is horrific, but every time I see Shenyang, which is an American-based company, but many of them are Falun Gong practitioners, and they couldn't go back to China because they would be harmed. And so every time I see this, there's one scene where they usually bring it to life. You have all these cultural dances, and then there's one 10-minute scene where they will show in a dance form uh, an experience of somebody who's stood up to the Chinese Communist Party, been a Falun Gong practitioner, and says they are, and they play the live organ harvesting scenario. So I encourage you, I've been around these people, meditated with them. Uh, they're some of the most peaceful, compassionate people, and they are making change in the world. I can't imagine doing this in communist China, but they do. And their lives are threatened every day. And so the people in the United States can't go back. And in fact, in the United States, people affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, actually, there's bomb threats against this group, all kinds of things that happen. So I encourage you to support them, or at least go see a show. It's beautiful, but that's the scene behind it. And so every year I do that. Which brings me to the second topic, that there was A book that I came across on that same topic, Killed to Order by Jan Jekielek. And Jan is the one of the senior editors at Epoch Times, and he came out with a fabulous book. And if you want to dive into it, this is the book that I would highly recommend you get. Um, Listen to a couple of podcast links that I have and read this book, but it gets into the details. And why do I care about that? Well, I care about people, but it's about freedom, freedom to express yourself. And if we've learned anything about a trend in the last 5 or 10 years worldwide that was highlighted in COVID, was that there's some powers that be that are trying to take away our freedoms on a worldwide level and on a national level. So that's the first part there. I have links to that, some interesting interviews on that topic. And then we come into some old, not old, but what I mean by old is this very experienced, have been in the nutrition industry, nutrition, functional medicine industry for years. There was an interview between neurologist Dr. Dale Bredesen, Alzheimer's uh, specialist, has written several books, End of Alzheimer's, on a holistic, and I say that in a very holistic metabolic approach to treating Alzheimer's disease. And then David Perlmutter is famous for Grain Brain, the book, but he's come out with another book called Brain Defenders. And so they went through this together, and it's probably fun for the two neurologists who are in the same field, very smart. You'll see them go back and forth. But the book is called Brain Defenders by Dr. Perlmutter. And basically it's this. We've, in thinking about Alzheimer's, traditionally, the medical establishment will just worry about amyloid plaque. And actually, these two people um, don't feel that that's it may be a healing approach of the body. It's not the cause of Alzheimer's disease. So one of the things is these brain defenders are microglia. They're the things that kind of clean up your brain and scavenge up uh, bad particles of metabolism and protect your brain. But there can be two forms: an M1 form, which is anti-inflammatory, and then two, there's the M2s, which can be pro-inflammatory. And it gets to being pretty sophisticated biochemistry, and they go back and forth. But the bottom line is that our lifestyle determines a lot of how this activity happens in the brain, of pro-inflammation versus anti-inflammation. So while they go through the details of it, the basics, and I've taken Dale Bredesen's physician training programs on several occasions, and there's an approach to Alzheimer's or cognitive decline that have kind of five basic fundamentals, which are: you must sleep so the microglia can work, and we have a lymphatic system in the brain that cleans it out, and we have to restore memory. That's my weak area, sleep. I don't sleep enough. Two is Alzheimer's has been known as type 3 diabetes, or sometimes said that way. We have to control blood sugar and insulin. So one goal is to get those two entities, the hemoglobin A1C and the fasting insulin, below 2. And you can do this in several ways. You can either do it, some people feel better on a mildly ketogenic diet, plant rich, but it creates ketosis. And others will say go on a whole food plant-based diet. But the goal is, no matter what you do, you want to make sure your insulin and hemoglobin A1C are around 5 each. That would be a goal. Uh, then there's exercise. Exercise is probably the single most important thing that you can do, that everybody can do, that doesn't cost money for their brain. Stimulates BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that helps build new neurons. And it's critically important, and it's cheap. When you start doing all these, I won't say alternative therapies, but integrative therapies, it can add up to a lot of money. So those are the three low-cost things. Four is good stress, learning a new language, and a challenging, your brain taking a new class. Overwhelming stress is very difficult. That suppresses cognitive function. Then the second tier is, you test for vitamins and minerals. All kinds of things I can think of there. Most of the time in traditional medicine, they might do B12, but I always do B1 levels, other B vitamins, magnesium, so minerals. And then there's hormones. Hormones are very important for the brain. And sometimes most of traditional medicine doesn't even pay attention to that. But hormones can make a big difference in someone's cognitive function, especially if they're low. And so you can do that. Environmental toxins, from mold to heavy metals, um, illnesses like Lyme disease, those are the hard ones, I think, to deal with, because it's difficult to get a cognitive declining patient to work with you. But once they get past a certain part, the partner has to do everything. And then it becomes a different animal. And that's a lot of times where failure happens. So those are some of the basics. And there's a summary of their interview with each other. And I think that it's a very good one to listen to. It's worth your time. Then uh, I've interviewed Michael Yon several times. He's a former Green Beret Special Forces individual who is also a world-renowned combat correspondent. He goes all over the world looking for choke points. It's all about routes, and resources. And of course, everybody is probably pretty aware that the Strait of Hormuz has been partially shut down or mostly shut down. And what that does is not only fuel, but that really can inhibit fertilizer being developed. And so there's, as well as the fuel going to countries that need it, fertilizer to help create food. And if people start bombing desalination plants, that could cause mass, not only death, but it could cause mass migration out of that area. All those things put an osmotic pressure, or people pressure, on famine. And so Michael Yon is always, well, he's been talking about it for 5 or 6 years. And so I have a link to, I've interviewed him 2 or 3 times on the topic, but there's a link in this issue about that particular topic. Then Dr. Paul Merrick from the Independent Medical Alliance has put out a Substack, and it just deals with cancer. Paul Merrick uh, was part of the original group called FLCCC. These were critical care doctors that got together and came up with protocols for treating people in the hospital with COVID, and then um, uh, COVID just by anybody treating it, and then by post-COVID syndrome and vaccine injury, etc. So this group got into cancer and repurposed drugs. So he has a great starting point. If you go to his Substack, I encourage that, or the Independent Medical Alliance site. There's a cancer hub that he puts out. But I put some links there to dietary fasting and calorie restriction during cancer. I've done it myself, and so I encourage you to go to those links. That group also did a thing on how vaccine injury occurs, and there appears to be not just vaccine injury, but injury from COVID. And there appears to be a three mechanism uh, ways it happens. One is autoimmunity, vascular dysfunction, and metabolic alteration, which would be mitochondrial dysfunction. And so those three things help create post-COVID kind of syndrome or the vaccine injury syndrome. And there's a link to an article there in this issue. Then there was a very interesting interview. One of the people I followed for a long time was Dan Buettner. Um, he wrote The Blue Zones originally, and I followed him for years. And I always feel like if you can study all the biochemistry in the world, but what's important is to see people who do it and what they do. So that's where the 5 blue zone cultures came from. And he wrote the book, The Blue Zones. That is Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda, California, Nicoya, Costa Rica, um, Sardinia, Italy, and Icaria, Greece were the original ones. And anyway, he interviews a doctor. What is the doctor's name? Alstead. Dr. Alstead is Steve Alstead is a biologist that studies animals and aging. And so there's this interesting dialogue, because there's certain animals I didn't realize it. There's a certain type of clam that lives 500 years. It's kind of mind-boggling. And there's a bowhead whale that lives 200 years, and their Greenland sharks may live up to 400 years. So we don't even think about that. So he was talking about in the animal kingdom, he's studying the way they age, and maybe we can learn some things from them. And one of the things that happened is this protein misfolding. And we're always repairing our body, but as we get older, we don't repair quite as well, and that's what causes aging. So there's this gradual loss of biological function caused by damage to DNA, proteins, mitochondria, that's the energy producing part of the cell, and cellular repair systems. So it's an interesting article, and he has, he doesn't take any supplements. He doesn't take any magic supplements. I think Dr. Osted's close to 80 or in his 80s, still researching. Um, but you want to slow cellular aging, and some of the lifestyle habits that he talked about were simply, and he didn't come up with any dramatic diet, but he said stay physically active. And I have to agree with that. The longer I do medicine, been doing it 43 years, and your patients age with you. And so, since I'm 68, some of them are, between 70 and 90. Actually, I have a 96-year-old. And, the people that move do better. And the people that have purpose, actively thinking, do better. So, as far as diet, eat whole foods, but nothing dramatic from his point of view. He doesn't take supplements. He doesn't think there's enough data on him. But movement and purpose. And the other thing is when you eat or when you're doing the things you're doing, being around people and interacting. A solo person, a loner, it's not the ideal for longevity. So whatever activities you do, when you do it around people and a collection of people, it's that part that intangible thing that keeps us going is community. So very interesting article, good webinar. Then there was a person that Dr. Michael Greger. I've many times at many whole food plant-based healthcare conferences. He's a keynote speaker because he's a bibliophile. He has a service called nutritionfacts.org. It's for free, and so you'll see all medical citations on different aspects of whole food plant-based um, eating and the science behind it. But he gave a talk, or he was interviewed on the Vumedi medical channel. It's kind of actually it's a traditional medical channel that they have interviews and or presentations. And he gave an interview on how to lower your cholesterol LDL by more than 10% just by certain foods, from certain types of black soybeans, uh, dried barberries or berries, sumac. I don't even know what that is, but it's a type of Middle Eastern berry, dried apple rings, 12 dried apple rings per day which is about 2 apples. And these are things that can lower LDL cholesterol by 10%, which is like some of the drugs. Amla, I've heard a lot about that. Psyllium seed husks, 2 grams of phytosterols. A vegan diet without olive oil does better than with olive oil. 1/8 of a teaspoon of garlic powder. 3 cups of green tea per day can be decaffeinated or caffeinated. And mushrooms, though it's not quite 10%. So anyway, he has a book called Lower LDL Cholesterol Naturally with Foods, Simple Ways to Add Proven LDL Reducers to Your Everyday Routine. And so there's a link there. So everything I put in my newsletter has a link to save you time to go where you need to go. And when I was doing going to a lot of plant-based healthcare conferences, the protein issue always comes up. How do you get your protein? And there's a bariatric surgeon there his name was Garth Davis. And he was a bariatric surgeon, very much into protein. And he ended up kind of doing a flip. And he wrote a book called Proteinaholic: How Our Obsession with Meat is Killing Us, an expert guide to weight loss surgery. And it's a worthwhile, that's another Vumedi lecture. You'll see him give a talk, but his book, I've read it, it's very good. So the key is to eat whole food, whole plant food if you're going to be a vegan. And generally speaking, if you eat a wide variety of food, you're going to get plenty of protein. That will be debated. Many people do. Then there's a trend in Canada for euthanasia. And then this is from a lot of Dr. William Mack's work, a radiation oncologist who does COVID Intel. It's a Substack. And it's just something to pay attention to. But there's been an increasing trend not only in Canada, but worldwide. And he brings our attention to that. Heard Dr. McCullough talk about sprouting. He's the creator of the McCullough Foundation. And he's one of the most outspoken. He's an internist cardiologist and epidemiologist on, the problems with the COVID vaccination. And he had McCullough protocol early treatment, and he's concerned about the spike protein. Um, and he has their company that he works for has created a product, um, TW the Wellness Company. And it's called the Ultimate Spike Detox. But he has a big thing on sprouts in his interview. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about cancer and fasting, and I wrote a little bit about my own experiences with it. But um, one of the biggest themes in the last probably 5 or 10 years is that you want to starve the cancer cell, because it doesn't produce energy very well, and so it gets most of its energy through fermentation, which is you need sugar. So if you go on a ketogenic diet or you eat a very low glycemic diet, you can help starve the cancer cell. And fasting is part of that regimen. So I go through my own experience of doing fasting with my colon cancer. I did some water fasting with a cup of coffee. I cheated a day, but I did some water fasting, and then I would do the Prolon, the fasting mimicking diet created by Walter Longo, and I have a link in there that I'm a big fan of. It's a structured 5-day low calorie food consumption that puts you in a fasting state. And so that helps. The idea is that you fast around the cancer cell, you fast around chemotherapy or whatever therapy you're doing, and that helps the cancer cell. Um, it makes it more susceptible to destruction, and while fasting protects good cells. So that is I think that'll be it. The last part is I always put in case studies. Usually they're from Dr. Makis's work on the use of ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole as kind of the main actors in treating cancers with repurposed drugs. And I see a trend now where he's using um, all three of them more. It's always ivermectin and either fenbendazole or mebendazole, but sometimes I'm seeing more cases where all three are used. So I would highly recommend it if you're interested in that. Get his newsletter, COVID Intel. It's on Substack. And my name is Kirk Hamilton. You have a wonderful Easter weekend, and I will talk to you soon.